Hi, everyone. I'm Toni Land, and welcome to Unlocking Knowledge, where we are currently reading The Mandate for Leadership, The Conservative Promise, Project 2025. Now, this was written in 2023 by the Heritage Foundation. Now, just as a quick refresh on why are we on this unlocking knowledge journey? And really it stems from my people being destroyed because of a lack of knowledge. And so many of us have been sitting back and we've been allowing ourselves to be spoon-fed information that shapes our thoughts and our opinions. And so now we're being intentional and we are leaning in and reading for ourselves and getting knowledge so that then we can step away and seek God and inform our own thoughts and our own opinions. So with that being said, I won't be sharing my thoughts or opinions either, as I don't want to be an influence on you. So let's get started in our reading for today. So we are in section 1, chapter 2, and this is our third session in chapter 2. Chapter 2 is entitled Executive Office of the President of the United States, and it is written by Russ Vought. So today, we are going to get right into the Council of Economic Advisors, or the CEA. Congress established the Council of Economic Advisors in 1946 to advise the president on global policy based on data, research, and evidence. The CEA is one of the oldest congressionally created offices within the White House complex and plays a broad role in bringing economic expertise to administration policy across a large range of policy areas. The CEA has one presidentially appointed and Senate confirmed chair, 2 presidentially appointed members who assist and often have expertise that complements the chair, and approximately 40 staff employees. Statutorily, the CEA is charged with being the president's principal source of economic advice. However, this role has diminished over time as its policy appraisal and especially formulation and recommendation functions have been taken over or diluted by other economic policy bodies within the White House. By law, the CEA is required to publish an annual economic report of the president within 10 days after submission of the budget. This report is not just a messaging document. It is an opportunity to provide greater rigor in support of policy areas that the White House is prioritizing and to build up the external credibility of those ideas. A future administration should utilize the CEA as the senior internal White House economist, much as the White House counsel's office functions as the senior internal White House lawyers. This does not mean that there are no economists in other offices, just as there are often lawyers in the policy councils and other White House offices. But the CEA's role, like the White House councils, is to employ its unique expertise, particularly on the technical side, to ensure that sound analysis is contributing to and shaping the policy discussion. In practice, this means that CEA staff do not coordinate the policy process in the way that the DPC or NEC would, but they should be integral to the EOP's policy development processes. CEA staff should support sound policy development and execution by actively contributing to running policy dialogues, proactively raising issues that need to be addressed, consulting on questions that arise, in guiding EOP and agency officials on the analytical foundations of policy. Structurally, the White House Chief of Staff should ensure that the CEA has a seat at the policymaking table on all relevant policy. Senior economists traditionally have not gone through the Office of Presidential Personnel process, and more often than not are hired on an academic year cycle. As a result, senior economists hired in the summer of a presidential election year tend to remain on staff until the next summer, even if a president from the opposite party takes power and installs a new slate of CEA political appointees for chair, members, etc. Although these hiring practices create some continuity, the presence of senior economists who were never fully vetted for their alignment within White House policy objectives, or who were holdovers from a recently departed administration, can breed skepticism and distrust of the CEA by other units within the White House, creating the risk that the CEA's role in the policymaking process will be diminished. A future administration should consider hiring that reflects the White House calendar mid-January and involves the Office of Presidential Personnel. Our next subheading, National Space Council, NSPC. The National Space Council is responsible for providing advice and recommendations to the President on the formulation and implementation of space policy and strategy. It is charged with conducting a whole of government approach to the nation's space interest, civil, military, intelligence, commercial, or diplomatic. Historically, it has been chaired by the Vice President at the President's direction, and its members consist of members of the Cabinet and other senior executive branch officials as specified by the President in Executive Order 13803. The NSPC's purpose is to ensure that the President's priorities relative to space are carried out and, as necessary, to resolve policy conflicts among departments and agencies that are related to space. Space projects and programs are risky, complex, expensive, and time-consuming, although commercial space innovations are lowering costs and accelerating schedules. Nevertheless, while fiscal discipline should not be ignored, long-term policy stability is crucial to investors, innovators, industry, and agencies. Policy stability is easier when policies and programs are aligned with long-term national interest as opposed to those of particular advocacy groups or political factions. The Trump administration's major space policies, including the U.S. Space Force, the Artemis program to land next Americans on the moon, and support for a strong commercial space sector, have endured under the Biden administration. Major challenges remain in implementation and regulatory reform to keep up with rapidly evolving space markets and competitors. These include the long-term sustainability of space activities in light of increasing orbital debris, creation of space situational awareness services for civil and commercial uses, management of mega constellations, licensing of new commercial remote sensing capabilities, keeping up with licensing demands due to high launch rates, transitioning International Space Station operations to multiple privately owned space platforms, and most important, accelerating the acquisition and fielding of national security space capabilities in response to an increasingly aggressive China. The Vice President should have a clear understanding with the National Security Advisor and the White House Counsel that they and their respective staffs will work within the White House to determine the scope and leadership of policy reviews that can overlap multiple areas of responsibility. A similar understanding is necessary with the heads of other policy councils, such as the NEC, DPC, and National Science and Technology Council, NSTC. As a result of the President's direction and the Vice President's leadership, the NSPC, under the Trump administration, was able to coordinate a wide range of space policy reviews, legislative proposals, and regulatory reforms smoothly. The NSPC generally led on space issues within the EOP, but other White House offices also took on some space topics. Bullet 1. As a member of the NSPC and in coordination with other members, the Office of Science and Technology Policy developed a national space weather strategy, research and development R&D plans to mitigate the effects of orbital debris, and protocols for planetary protection to avoid biological contamination of celestial bodies. Bullet 2. The Council of Economic Advisors did research on the economic benefits of space property rights. And Bullet 3. OMB's Office of Information and Regulatory Reform updated and streamlined commercial launch licensing and commercial remote sensing satellite rules. During the Trump administration, if a topic was purely military, such as standing up the U.S. Space Command, the NSC took the lead. If a topic cut across military, civil, and commercial sectors, as was the case with cybersecurity in space, the NSPC and NEC would co-chair the policy review groups. Trusted collegial relationships across the White House complex are critical to successful space policy development, implementation, and oversight. Nowhere is this more important than in the relationship between the NSPC staff and the OMB staff, who oversee civil and national security-related space spending. Teamwork between the NSPC and OMB staff can communicate clear presidential priorities to departments and agencies, facilitating smooth development of the president's budget requests. The NSPC and OMB have many opportunities to collaborate in promoting presidential priorities while finding offsets in lower priority programs and funding lines. Our next subheading, Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP. The White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, was created by the National Science and Technology Policy Organization and Priorities Act of 1976. Before its creation, presidents received their advice and counsel on such matters through advisors and boards that had no statutory authority. The director of OSTP is one of the few Senate-confirmed positions within the executive office of the president. Consistent with other laws, the president may delegate to the director of OSTP directive authority over other elements of the executive branch. Other EOP policy officials and organizations, such as the NSC and NEC, are formally only advisory with relevant agency directives issued by the President. The OSTP's functions, as contained in the law, are to advise the President of scientific and technological considerations, evaluate the effectiveness of the federal effort, and generally lead and coordinate the federal government's R&D programs. If science is being manipulated at the agencies to support separate political and institutional agendas, the President should increase the prominence of the OSTP's director, either formally or informally. This would elevate the role of science in policy discussions and subsequent outcomes, and theoretically help to balance out agencies like the Departments of Energy, State and Commerce, and the Environmental Protection Agency and Council on Environmental Quality. The OSTP can also help to bring technical expertise to regulatory matters in support of OMB. The OSTP should continue to play a lead role in coordinating federal R&D programs. Recent legislation, especially the CHIPS and Science Act, has expanded federal policy and funding across the enterprise. And there is a need for more significant leadership in this area, both to ensure effectiveness and to avoid duplication of effort. As befitting its location in the White House, the OSTP must be concerned with advancing national interest and not merely the parochial concerns of departments, agencies, or parts of the scientific community. During the Trump and Biden administrations, there has been a bipartisan focus on prioritizing R&D funding around the so-called Industries of the Future, OFTP. Under President Trump, OFTP priorities were artificial intelligence, AI, quantum information science, QIS, advanced communications, 5G, advanced manufacturing, and biotechnology. Under President Biden, this list was expanded to include advanced materials, robotics, battery technology, cybersecurity, green products and clean technology, plant genetics and agricultural technologies, nanotechnology, and semiconductor and microelectronics technologies. These priorities should be evaluated and narrowed to ensure consistency with the next administration's priorities. Given a long list of priorities, coordinating efforts across agencies and measuring success are extremely challenging. The OSTP and OMB are required to work together on an annual basis to prioritize the funding request and whatever Congress adds on top of them. But there continues to be concern about mission creep and funds expended on nonspecific R&D. The President should also issue an executive order to reshape the U.S. Global Change Research Program, USG-CRP, and related climate research programs. The USG-CRP produces strategic plans and research, for example, the National Climate Assessment, that reduce the scope of legally proper options in presidential decision-making and in agency rulemakings and adjudications. Also, since much environmental policymaking must run the gauntlet of judicial review, USG-CRP actions can frustrate successful litigation defense in ways that the career bureaucracy should not be permitted to control. The process for producing assessments should include diverse viewpoints. The OSTP and OMB should jointly assess the independence of the contractors used to conduct much of this outsourced government research that serves as the basis for policymaking. The next president should critically analyze and, if required, refuse to accept any USG CRP assessment required or prepared under the Biden administration. The president should also restore related EOP research components to their purely informational and advisory roles. Consistent with the Global Change Research Act of 1990, USG CRP related EOP components should be confined to a more limited advisory role. These components should include, but not necessarily be limited to, the OSTP, the NSPC's Council on Environment, the USG CRP's interagency groups, for example, the Carbon Cycle Interagency Working Group, and the Federal Coordinating Council for Science, Engineering, and Technology. As a general matter, the new administration should separate the scientific risk assessment function from the risk management function, which is the exclusive domain of elected policymakers and the public. Finally, the next administration will face a significant challenge in unwinding policies and procedures that are used to advance radical gender, racial, and equity initiatives under the banner of science. Similarly, the Biden administration's climate fanaticism will need a whole of government unwinding. As with other federal departments and agencies, the Biden administration's leveraging of the federal government's resources to further the woke agenda should be reversed and scrubbed from all policy manuals, guidance documents, and agendas, and scientific excellence and innovation should be restored as the OSTP's top priority. Our next subheading, Council on Environmental Quality, CEQ. The Council on Environmental Quality is the EOP component with the principal task of administering the National Environmental Policy Act, NEAP, by issuing regulations and interpretive documents and by overseeing the process of individual permitting agencies' own EAP regulations, including categorical exclusions. The CEQ also coordinates environmental policy across the federal government, and its influence has waxed and waned across administrations. The president should instruct the CEQ to rewrite its regulations implementing NEPA along the lines of the historic 2020 effort in restoring its key provisions, such as banning the use of cumulative impact analysis. This effort should incorporate new learning and more aggressive reform options that were not included in the 2020 reform package, with the overall goal of streamlining the process to build on the Supreme Court ruling that CEQ's interpretation of NEPA is entitled to substantial deference. It should frame the new regulations to limit the scope for judicial review of agency NEPA analysis and judicial remedies, as well as to vindicate the strong public interest in effective and timely agency action. The Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council, FPISC, of which the CEQ is a part, has been empowered by Congress through significant new funding amendments to FAST 41. The president should build on this foundation to further empower the FPISC by making its executive director an EOP appointee with delegated presidential directive authority over executive branch permitting agencies. For instance, the implementation of Executive Order 13807's one federal decision revealed many ways that the systems established by EO 13807 can be improved. The new president should seek to issue a new executive order to create a unified process for major infrastructure projects that includes giving project proponents more control of any regulatory clocks. The president should issue an executive order establishing a senior advisor to coordinate the policy development and implementation of relevant energy and environmental policy by officials across the EOP. For example, the policy staff of the NSC, NEC, DPC, CEQ, and OSTP, and abolishing the existing Office of Domestic Climate Policy. The senior advisor would report directly to the Chief of Staff. The role would be similar to the role that Brian Deese and John Podesta had in the Obama White House. This energy environmental coordinator would help to lead the fight for sound energy and environmental policies, both domestically and internationally. The president should eliminate the Interagency Working Group on Social Cost of Carbon, SCC, which is co-chaired by the OSTP, OMB, and CEA, and by executive order should end the use of SCC analysis. Finally, the president should work with Congress to establish a sweeping modernization of the entire permitting system across all departments and agencies that is aimed at reducing litigation risk and giving agencies the authority to establish programmatic, general, and provisional permits. And so our next subheading, Office of National Drug Control Policy, ONDCP. Congress created the Office of National Drug Control Policy, ONDCP, through the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1988 to serve as a coordinative auxiliary for the president on all matters related to drug policy. The next president's top drug policy priority must be to address the current fentanyl crisis and reduce the number of overdoses and fatalities. This crisis resulted in the deaths of more than 100,000 Americans in 2021. The next administration must reaffirm a commitment to preventing drug use before it starts, preventing treatment that leads to long-term recovery, and reducing the availability of illicit drugs in the United States. The drug trafficking environment is exponentially more dynamic and dangerous today than it was just 5 years ago, as powerful synthetic opioids, fentanyl and its analogs, are mixed into other drugs of abuse. Drug trafficking organizations are extremely nimble and able to adapt quickly to federal government actions and changes in user behavior. Disrupting the flow of drugs across our borders and into our communities is of paramount importance, both to save lives and to bolster our public health efforts. For these reasons, the director of ONDCP should make it a point to consult with federal border enforcement officials. The National Drug Control Program agencies represented a total of $41 billion in fiscal year 2022. Whereas the position for overseeing budget activities is traditionally held by a career official, it is imperative that a political appointee lead the ONDCP Budget Office to ensure coordination between the OMB Program Associate Director and the ONDCP budgetary appointee. ONDCP grant-making activities have been controversial over the years, particularly with conservative administrations concerned that the White House lacks the expertise to oversee such programs directly. The ONDCP administers two grant programs, the Drug-Free Community Support Program and the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Areas Program. While it makes sense to transfer these programs eventually to the Department of Justice, Department of Health and Human Services, respectively, it is vital that the ONDCP director ensure in the immediate term that these grant programs, are funding the president's drug control priorities and not woke nonprofits with leftist policy agendas. Thus, the president must ensure that the ONDCP is managed by political appointees who are committed to the administration's agenda and not acquiesce to management by political or career military personnel who oversaw the prior administration's ONDCP. Next up, Gender Policy Council, GPC. The president should immediately revoke Executive Order 14020 and every policy, including sub-regulatory guidance documents produced on behalf of or related to the establishment of or promotion of the Gender Policy Council and its subsidiary issues. Abolishing the Gender Policy Council would eliminate central promotion of abortion, health services, comprehensive sexuality education, and the new woke gender ideology, which has a principal tenet, gender affirming care and sex change surgeries on minors. In addition to eliminating the council, developing new structures and positions will have the dual effect of demonstrating that promoting life and strengthening the family is a priority while also facilitating a more seamless coordination and consistency across the U.S. government. Specifically, the president should appoint a position or point of contact with the rank, a special assistant to the president or higher to coordinate and lead the president's domestic priorities on issues related to life and family in cooperation with the Domestic Policy Council. This position would be responsible for facilitating meetings, discussions, and agreements among personnel, coordinating administration policy, and ensuring agency support for implementation of policies related to the promotion of life and family in the United States. And our last section, Office of the Vice President, OVP. The Vice President is elected to the second highest office in the nation and plays a constitutionally vital role as president in waiting. The Vice President is also the President of the Senate and is charged with breaking tie votes in that body. In recent years, the Vice President has been granted office space in the West Wing and the Eisenhower Executive Office Building. The OVP is another one of the levers that the president should use to execute his agenda. This is particularly true because there is significant and unique leverage that the vice president's leadership of the OVP can evoke to shape policy discussions and outcomes. Every other appointed White House official serves at the pleasure of the president, whereas the vice president is elected, and the process for filling vacancies in that Article 2 constitutional office, which includes confirmation of a replacement vice president by a majority of both houses of Congress, is governed by the 25th Amendment. The vice president has his or her own economic advisors, domestic policy and national security staff, and daily intelligence briefings. The vice president should fill his or her office with strong and sound policy minds to effectively assist the president in fulfilling his agenda. The vice president is also a statutory member of the National Security Council. In theory, in light of the fact that the president is a member of the Smithsonian's Institution's Board of Regents, there is nothing to prevent Congress from assigning the vice president additional statutory duties. All of the component councils and offices discussed in this chapter include real policy development and implementation authority, and a robust OVP should be fully integrated into all policy formation procedures. Only a vice president who is deeply steeped in the interworking of the interagency and policy councils can offer useful advice and prove helpful in accomplishing the president's agenda. It is also obvious, in view of the fact that many former vice presidents have gone on to be elected president in their own right, that the vice presidency can act as a training ground for presidential office. In the past, the vice president has been tasked with leading certain initiatives or issues. For example, Mike Pence was tasked with coordinating the federal response to COVID-19. And both Pence and Kamala Harris have chaired the National Space Council. Vice Presidents Richard Cheney and Dan Quayle were also active on the deregulatory front and in imposing regulatory moratoria. However, OVP officials should be fully integrated into each and every process from the start of a new administration and not have to wait to be invited to join various meetings or working groups on an ad hoc basis. For example, the budget and regulatory review processes are linchpins in the execution of policy, and the OVP should have a seat at the table through every process of policy development. Past vice presidents have also spent significant time abroad, serving as a type of brand ambassador for the White House and more broadly for the United States, announcing administration priorities and coordinating with heads of state and other top officials of foreign governments. The vice president, as president of the Senate, often serves as a presidential emissary to the Senate and thus can be especially helpful in securing passage of the president's legislative agenda. To the extent that he or she desires, a vice president can have a direct role in shaping administration policy. A vice president who regularly attends meetings and disperses staff across the interagency and policy councils is a vice president whose voice will be heard. So that finishes chapter 2 for us. So next time together, we will lean right in to chapter 3, which is entitled Central Personnel Agencies Managing the Bureaucracy, and it is written by Donald Devine, Dennis Dean Kirk, and Paul Dans. So I'm looking forward to digging in to chapter 3. Thank you for leaning in, spending that time with us together. And remember, as always, my people are destroyed because of a lack of knowledge. So today and every day, let's get some knowledge.